Developing now, a stalemate in Washington, D.C. that could threaten your livelihood. President Trump has abruptly called off negotiations with House Democrats over a new stimulus bill to help the U.S. economy weather the coronavirus pandemic. The president tweeted out this afternoon that he wants the talks to stop until after the election.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin were negotiating in recent days and indicated several times that they were close to reaching a deal. The president's announcement came just hours after Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell issued a new warning about severe ongoing risks to the economy due to the pandemic. Powell warned of an economic tragedy if the U.S. cannot control the coronavirus and if Congress does not pass a new stimulus package.
One such risk is that COVID-19 cases might again rise to levels that more significantly limit economic activity, not to mention the tragic effects on lives and well-being. Managing this risk as the expansion continues will require following medical experts' guidance, including using masks and social distancing measures.
Democrats are hitting back hard. Speaker Pelosi said, and I quote, "Today, once again, President Trump showed his true colors, putting himself first at the expense of the country. Clearly, the White House is in complete disarray." Stocks took a wild swing after the president ended the stimulus negotiations. The Dow plunged about 600 points, closing down about 350 points for the day.
This all comes just 24 hours after the president returned to the White House after a 3-day hospital stay at Walter Reed Medical Center battling the coronavirus. Tonight, the president should be getting his 5th and final dose of remdesivir, an experimental drug cocktail to fight the virus. The White House physician telling the press today the president doesn't report any COVID-19 symptoms now and is doing well.
And the president is again minimizing the threat of the virus to the public. The president seemed to falsely claim on Twitter that the flu is more deadly than COVID-19. That post was flagged by Twitter as being untrue and was taken down by Facebook. Over the past few days, the president received medical care that would be inaccessible to most Americans. He was sick enough to twice be placed on supplemental oxygen, was provided experimental drugs that aren't FDA approved for COVID, and received a steroid that's usually reserved for severely or critically ill patients. And this recent conduct by the president is alarming some here in our state.
Those who study the virus, as well as those who have watched loved ones suffer through it, fear the president's words could encourage some to let their guard down, even though a vaccine is still months away. Tonight, we have complete team coverage. KOMO's Keith Eldridge is standing by, but we begin with KOMO's Patrick Quinn.
Eric, Molly, for us here in the Pacific Northwest and in Seattle, we have stomached this virus longer than any other region in the country. Since its outbreak, we've taken you to the hot spots. We've walked the halls of the packed ICUs. We've shown you the businesses now boarded up from the economic fallout. We've heard stories of incredible resilience and those of sobering death. So for many here in our region, to watch the president continue to shake off the virus's seriousness, it's personal.
Don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it.
Some will beat the virus, some won't, some couldn't. Are these words of toughness, or was the president out of touch?
There are real people dying, real people who were really healthy to start with. And this virus is taking them out.
Kathy Julian knows the real toll of this novel virus all too well. She watched her husband Kurt die from it in May.
To have our leader acting as though, I don't know if these are his exact words, but it's no big deal. There's nothing to be afraid of. It seems very cavalier, very calloused, and very self-centered.
Kurt Julian, an ICU nurse, was on the front line to the COVID outbreak in Kirkland.
We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently.
Kathy says Kurt couldn't get the drugs the president got, like Regeneron, an experimental antibody cocktail, or remdesivir, an antiviral shown to shorten hospital stays.
It's just an embarrassment.
Neither could Scott Sedlacek, who survived through the disease.
He had access to drugs that I didn't have, and I wouldn't have if I went to the hospital today.
Scott lived. So did his dad, Chuck, who contracted the virus at the Life Care Center in Kirkland. For Kathy, an ICU nurse herself, she fears the president's posture could downplay the virus's wrath.
This isn't just a hoax, as I saw written on somebody's disposable mask going out of the grocery store. And I thought, it's not. There are people so incredibly affected by this.
Those are just two stories. You may have one of your own. And again, for many people watching the president back at the White House infected with COVID, but standing and without a mask, it may be the hopeful sign you needed to see. For others, as you heard, it's the wrong kind of inspiration. In Seattle, Patrick Quinn, KOMO News.
Patrick, thank you. Within the last hour, another top aide to President Trump, Stephen Miller, announced that he has tested positive for COVID-19. That makes at least 20 people who were near or around the president in the last week that have tested positive. But a federal health official says the White House has refused offers from the CDC to help with contact tracing for the coronavirus. The official tells CNN that the CDC offered its help almost immediately after the president made his diagnosis public. The agency reportedly repeated the offer yesterday. The White House has given little indication that it is making a comprehensive effort to properly conduct contact tracing. Some of the attendees at recent Trump events say they have not been contacted. The governor and a top COVID disease modeler are afraid that the president's actions will cost lives. KOMO's Keith Eldridge continues our coverage live. Keith?
Yeah, the governor says that the president's actions and words could actually drive the death rate up. Now, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington has the numbers for us. They say if people follow the president's lead and don't mask up, we'll see 435,000 deaths by January 1st instead of the 363,000 now projected. If more people masked up, though, they say the number drops to 278,000 deaths.
I just have to tell you what's so troublesome to me. When he was standing on that balcony, you can look out towards the Washington Monument, and if you looked out there, this is what you'd see last night. 20,000 chairs around the Washington Monument. You can see that from the south balcony. And those 20,000 chairs, each one represents 10 deceased Americans killed by the COVID virus. Over 200,000 people represented by that. And how anyone could look out on the representation of 200,000 deceased Americans and belittle the threat that this virus poses.
That's a dangerous message because right now we have over 210,000 deaths in the United States. COVID-19 is the second leading cause of mortality this year after ischemic heart disease, before lung cancer and before diabetes. So how could we say this is not a dangerous disease?
On a bright note, the governor did ease some restrictions on some of the things going on in the Phase 2 and Phase 3 counties, including libraries, movie theaters, and restaurants. And the alcohol cutoff now is going to be 11 o'clock at night. There's also going to be increased wedding receptions and some sporting activities. But I have to tell you, high school football is still set for the spring, and still no fans in the stands for college football or professional football for the foreseeable future. Live at home in Buckley, Keith Eldridge, KOMO News.
Keith, thank you. The latest coronavirus numbers from Johns Hopkins University showed that the United States is just about to cross that 7.5 million mark for total cases. And so far, more than 210,000 Americans have died from the virus. The State Department of Health also released some new numbers for Washington. Right now, at least 2,165 people have died from COVID-19. That's up 7 since yesterday's report. Nearly 7,700 people have been hospitalized, up by 51 in the last 24 hours. And there have been more than 90,600 cases statewide, 387 more than were reported yesterday.
And here in King County with Seattle Public Health, we're seeing 3 of those deaths come from this county here. We're also seeing 7 new hospitalizations and a total of 119 new positive cases. We are, though, seeing this stay at 3.5% on the top right-hand side of your screen there. 3.5% of all people being tested right now for COVID-19 are turning out to be positive. So that's staying right around that same number we've been seeing now for a little while. Meantime, this is breaking breaking now. Associated Press and others reporting that Joe Biden is saying that, quote, we shouldn't have next debate next week with President Trump if he's still infected with the coronavirus. Of course, the next presidential debate scheduled for October 15th in Miami, the third slated for October 22nd. We'll keep our eyes on this, let you know if anything develops.
And meanwhile, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other senior Pentagon officials are self-quarantining after Admiral Charles Ray contracted COVID-19. He is the vice commandant of the Coast Guard. He was in meetings with his counterparts last week and also attended a White House event with many of them on September 27th. So far, none of the other military leaders have tested positive.
In the last hour, the White House announced senior advisor Stephen Miller has tested positive for coronavirus. This as President Trump continues to receive treatment for the virus, tweeting he's feeling great. As Deborah Alfarone reports now, he's also halting negotiations over a new coronavirus aid package until after the election, leaving investors rattled.
Dave, we're learning tonight that yet another staffer has tested positive for coronavirus, this time top aide of the president, Stephen Miller. President Trump ended coronavirus negotiations with congressional Democrats over demands for state and local funding, tweeting, I am rejecting their request. Immediately after I win, we will pass a major stimulus bill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi accused President Trump of putting himself first at the expense of the country. The president downplayed the coronavirus as less lethal than the flu in a tweet. Twitter flagged it as, quote, spreading misleading and potentially harmful information. The president also says he's looking forward to participating in next week's presidential debate in Miami, Florida.
The president's intention is to go and participate in the debate in person, and we'll be relying on the world's best medical experts to clear him to do that.
2020 Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden called for unity during a campaign speech in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Too many Americans seek not to overcome our divisions, but to deepen them. We must seek not to build walls, but bridges.
Meanwhile, the 2020 vice presidential contenders continue to test negative ahead of their Wednesday debate. And as far as tomorrow night's vice presidential debate, we're hearing that there might be these plexiglass barriers that are in between the two candidates there. But now we're hearing late tonight, a senior official is saying that Vice President Pence says he doesn't want one. So we're going to have to wait and see. We're at the White House tonight. I'm Deborah Alfarone for Cairo 7 News.
A Seattle woman who survived COVID-19 but just lost her husband to the disease is speaking out. President Trump's comments about the virus prompted her to share her experience. Cairo 7's Allison Grandy joins us live with the story you will only see here. Allison, this disease devastated her life.
It sure has, Simney. And so her husband, keep this in mind, her husband died less than a week ago. And when she heard President Trump tell the world COVID-19 is not something to be afraid of, she wanted to tell her story.
I was insulted for everyone that has COVID.
Cindy Khalsa survived COVID-19. Her husband, Saddah Simran Khalsa, did not. After fighting to live for 2 months, he died October 1st. Hearing the president tell people COVID isn't something to be afraid of.
He showed us that he has no compassion of what it feels like.
Saddah was 68 years old, a healthy yoga instructor who taught Kundalini yoga throughout Seattle. When the pandemic started, he taught from home.
Relax all the entire being.
They were high school sweethearts and went to prom in Renton in 1970. When they reunited later in life, they had no idea they would be in for the fight for their lives. They both got COVID-19 the first week in August.
The COVID owns you.
A week later, Saddah was in ICU at Swedish Cherry Hill on a ventilator. Cindy was home in bed fighting COVID alone.
It's so heart-wrenching to know that you can't even hold his hand. You absolutely have this man that you love more than anything in the world.
Incredibly, Saddah survived. He got off the ventilator and into physical therapy.
They brought this person that should have died back to life.
But then, after 2 months in the hospital, he got an infection in his gallbladder.
So they put him on the ventilator, and he just couldn't handle it.
Now Cindy is grieving. So is the community that counted on Saddah to help find their strength and peace. and she pleads for compassion.
The president has got to start having compassion. Someone needs to take him in a room and teach him compassion.
Cindy believes her husband's years of teaching are his legacy, preparing others to stay strong and calm during the pandemic. Allison Grandy, Cairo 7 News.
That is really a heartbreaking story, Allison. Thank you. Here are the latest COVID-19 case numbers in Washington. There are now 90,600 cases in the state and 2,165 deaths. The state's positive test percentage sits at 3.5%. The goal is to be under 2%. The outbreak in the University of Washington Greek system, meantime, keeps on growing. As of this morning, there were 177 positive cases connected to 14 fraternities and sororities. None of the cases appear to be severe, and the university is unaware of any hospitalizations. Students in the Greek community who test positive or have COVID-like symptoms are told to isolate. Students who had close contact with infected peers are told to get tested. You can download